2 days after we buried my daughter, my son-in-law, a man I had welcomed into my home, and my heart, told me to get out. My name is Arthur Vance, and I had just lost the single most important person in my world. Eleanor was everything to me. My only child, my compass, my quiet pride, and my deepest joy. But what her husband, Mark, didn't know was that the house he was so callously kicking me out of, the beautiful Seattle brownstone he'd been bragging about owning for the last 7 years. Well, let's just say the paperwork buried in a fireproof safe in my study told a very, very different story. You see, Mark Sterling, with his MBA and his sleek German car, thought he knew everything about assets, about leverage, about power. He thought he understood property ownership. He thought he could push around the quiet old man who spent his days fixing leaky faucets, tending the garden, and changing light bulbs. What he didn't realize was that I had been keeping a secret for 25 years, a secret born of love and a father's fierce need to protect his child, a secret that was about to detonate under the foundations of his perfect, curated world. If you're watching this, please take a moment to subscribe and let me know in the comments where you're watching from. I find comfort in knowing how far these stories travel. But before I tell you how this all unfolded, before the lawyers and the documents and the final, brutal confrontation, you need to understand how we got here. Eleanor had been sick for 8 long months. Cancer, the kind that moves like a wildfire, fast and merciless, leaving no time to prepare, no space to breathe. I had spent every one of those 240 days at her side, either in the sterile, beige quiet of the hospital room or here, in this house, holding her hand, reading to her, watching my beautiful, vibrant daughter fade away while Mark complained about the hospital parking fees. "Can't you just visit on the weekends, Art?" he'd said to me one afternoon, scrolling through his stock portfolio on his phone as my daughter slept fitfully a few feet away. "This is costing me a fortune in gas and lost time." That should have been my first real warning. Not about his greed, I'd always known about that, but about the profound, chilling absence of a soul. After the funeral on Monday, a gray, drizzly Seattle affair, I thought we'd grieve together. I thought, in my naivety, that this shared, shattering loss would forge some kind of bond between us. I thought we would support each other through the worst time of our lives. Instead, Mark waited exactly 48 hours before cornering me in the kitchen, the very heart of the home I had built. "Look, Art," he said, his eyes glued to the bright screen of his phone, his tone casual, as if he were discussing the weather. "I've been thinking. This house is far too big for one person, and honestly, I need a fresh start. A clean slate. You understand, right?" I was still wearing my funeral suit. I hadn't had the strength to change. The memorial program for my daughter, with her smiling face on the cover, was still in my jacket pocket. My heart felt like a lead weight in my chest. "Where am I supposed to go, Mark?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "There's a nice assisted living place over on Maple Street, Sunset Manor. I looked it up. Only $1,800 a month. Seems reasonable." $1,800 a month. My Social Security check was $1,400. My small pension from the architectural firm I'd retired from years ago was another $600. The numbers swam in my head, a dizzying calculus of despair. "Mark," I said, "I don't have that kind of money." He finally looked up from his phone, and for the first time, I saw something in his eyes I had never allowed myself to notice before. A cold, flat, reptilian calculation. "Well," he said with a slight shrug, That's not really my problem anymore, is it? I mean, you've been living here rent-free for 7 years. Most people would call that pretty generous. Rent-free. The words hung in the air, thick with poison. Rent-free, as if I hadn't been the one paying for the groceries that filled the pantry, the utility bills that kept the lights on, the endless maintenance that a historic home required. Rent-free, as if I hadn't spent my weekends refinishing the hardwood floors, rebuilding the back deck, and handling every single repair Mark was too lazy or incompetent to handle himself. Eleanor wanted me to stay here, I said quietly, my voice trembling with a grief that was rapidly turning to rage. Eleanor's gone. His voice was flat, devoid of any emotion, matter of fact. And this is my house now. The next morning, the true measure of his cruelty revealed itself. I found him in the garage, a place that had been my workshop, my sanctuary. He was systematically throwing away Eleanor's photo albums, tossing them into a large industrial dumpster he had rented. "What are you doing?" I cried out, my voice raw with disbelief. "Cleaning out junk," he said, not even turning to look at me. "Chloe's moving in next month, and she doesn't want a bunch of old pictures lying around." Chloe. His new girlfriend. The one whose name I'd seen flashing on his phone during Eleanor's final chemotherapy sessions. The one he was already planning to install in my daughter's home, in my daughter's bed. I lunged for the dumpster, my 63-year-old body moving with a strength I didn't know I possessed. I managed to rescue what I could, but he had been brutally efficient. Most of Eleanor's childhood, most of our shared life, was already buried under bags of trash. 28 years of birthday parties, school plays, family vacations, gone. "You're throwing away our daughter's life," I said, tears streaming down my face. He finally turned to face me, his expression one of pure, unadulterated contempt. "She's not our daughter anymore, Art. She's just your daughter, and you're just a tenant whose welcome has been overstayed." By Wednesday evening, he had changed the locks on the tool shed where I kept my equipment. These weren't just tools. They were an extension of my life's work, a collection I had amassed over 40 years as an architect and builder. Professional-grade equipment, Hilti, Festool, Lie-Nielsen, tools worth more than his shiny BMW. "Security precaution," he explained with a smirk when I asked for the key. "Can't be too careful these days." That's when he handed me the papers. A 30-day notice to vacate, printed on official-looking letterhead he'd probably designed himself. 30 days? I said, the paper trembling in my hand. 30 days to find a place, pack up 40 years of belongings, and start my life over? "That's the legal minimum in Washington state," he said, the picture of magnanimity. "I'm being more than fair." Fair. The man who had never paid a dime for the roof over his head, who had lived a life of subsidized comfort, thought he was being fair. "Mark, please," I begged, my pride turning to dust in my mouth. "Can we talk about this? Maybe work something out?" He laughed. An actual, barking laugh. "Work what out, Art? You're a retired handyman living on Social Security. I'm a successful tech executive with a 6-figure salary and a stock portfolio. What exactly do you bring to the table?" I looked at this man, this stranger who had slept under my roof for 7 years, who had eaten thousands of meals I had cooked, who had never once said thank you for the 1,000 small repairs I had made to keep his life comfortable and convenient. "You'd be surprised," I said quietly. But he had already walked away, probably to text Chloe about how he'd finally, decisively, gotten rid of the old man. He had no idea that the next day the tables were going to turn so violently it would create a seismic shock that would shatter his entire world. Have you ever been in a situation where you felt completely powerless, only to discover you held a hidden trump card all along? Share your story in the comments. And if you're enjoying this tale of deception and long overdue justice, please give this video a thumbs up. Thursday morning, I sat in my bedroom, the bedroom that Mark was about to take away from me, and made a dispassionate list of everything I stood to lose. It wasn't just the house, though that pain was a physical ache in my chest. This was the house where I had brought Eleanor home from the hospital, a tiny, perfect bundle in a pink blanket. This was where she had taken her first steps, said her first words, brought home her first report card. Every room, every floorboard, held 40 years of memories that Mark was about to erase with the cold efficiency of a corporate merger. But it was more than sentiment. At 63, starting over wasn't just difficult. It was a terrifying, almost impossible prospect. I spent an hour on the phone, a grim reconnaissance of my bleak future. I checked Mark's suggestion about Sunset Manor. The $1,800 a month figure was, of course, just the base rate. Add in meals, laundry, and the most basic level of care, and we were talking $2,500 minimum. My Social Security was $1,400. My small pension was another $600. The math was simple and terrifying. I would be homeless in 3 months. I called the other assisted living facilities in the Seattle area. Shady Grove wanted $3,200. Mountain View wanted $2,800, plus a $5,000 non-refundable deposit. Even the places with a litany of health code violations and desperate one-star reviews wanted more than I could possibly afford. My savings account, once robust, now held a meager $8,000. Eleanor's medical bills, the ones that weren't covered by our dwindling insurance, had eaten through the bulk of my retirement fund. Even if I found the cheapest, most squalid room in the worst facility in the city, I would be broke before Christmas. But the worst part, the part that felt like a physical violation, was watching Mark systematically erase every trace of my daughter's existence. On Wednesday night, I had caught him going through Eleanor's jewelry box. Her grandmother's pearl necklace, the one that had been passed down through 3 generations of women in our family, was sitting on his nightstand next to a receipt from a local pawn shop. "That's not yours to sell," I had said, my voice shaking with rage. "Everything in this house belongs to me now," he had replied, not even looking up. "Estate law is pretty clear about that." Estate law. As if Mark Sterling, a man whose only reading material was sales reports and tech blogs, knew the first thing about legal matters. I had tried calling Eleanor's friends, hoping someone, anyone, might have a spare room, a basement, a couch for an old man to crash on temporarily. Most were sympathetic but practical. They were young families with their own mortgages, their own problems. There was no room for a grieving, destitute father-in-law. I had even swallowed my pride and called my brother in Phoenix. We hadn't spoken in 5 years, not since a bitter argument over our mother's will. He listened politely to my predicament, then explained that his homeowners association had very strict rules about long-term guests. "Maybe it's time to consider a retirement community anyway, Art," he'd said, his voice full of a false, cheerful pragmatism. "Might be good for you to be around people your own age." People my own age. As if staying connected to my daughter's memory, to the home she had loved, was somehow unhealthy. By Thursday afternoon, The brutal reality had fully settled in. Mark held all the cards. He had possession of the house, legal documentation showing he was Eleanor's surviving spouse, and the kind of arrogant, unshakable confidence that could bulldoze through any objection I might raise. I was the poor relation, the charity case, who had been living off his generosity for 7 years. I was a man with no legal standing, no financial resources, and no apparent options. At least, that's what he believed. I spent Thursday evening in Eleanor's room, which he had not yet violated, looking through the documents I had kept safely tucked away in the back of her closet. Her birth certificate, her school records, her acceptance letter to the University of Washington, the paper trail of a life cut short at the age of 32. But there were other papers in that closet, papers Mark had never bothered to examine, papers that told a very different story about who owned what in this house. I pulled out my phone and called Isabella Rossi's office. Isabella had been my attorney for 15 years, ever since we had worked together on a complex commercial property development deal back in 2009. She had also been a student of mine at the University of Washington back when I was teaching architectural history, before I had stepped back to live a quieter life. "Art," she said when she answered, her voice warm with sympathy. "I am so sorry about Eleanor. How are you holding up?" "I've been better, Izzy. Listen, I need to schedule a will reading. Tomorrow, if possible." "Of course." "Eleanor's will?" "Among other things," I said. "And Izzy, I need you to send formal, urgent invitations to a few specific people, including Mark." There was a pause on the other end of the line. Isabella had known me long enough to recognize the sound of a carefully laid plan. "Art, what's going on?" "Let's just say it's time for some old paperwork to see the daylight." "Can you get everyone together at 2 o'clock tomorrow?" "I can make that work. Who do you want there?" I gave her the list. Mark, obviously. Chloe, his new girlfriend, since she was apparently already measuring for new curtains. Frank Rodriguez from next door. He had witnessed enough of Mark's appalling behavior this week to serve as a valuable character witness. Janet Harrison from First National Bank. And a few other neighbors who had been watching this drama unfold with a mixture of horror and sympathy. "That's quite a guest list for a simple will reading," Isabella observed, her lawyer's mind clearly intrigued. "Trust me, Izzy, they're all going to want to hear this." After hanging up, I sat quietly in Eleanor's room, surrounded by memories and documents. Tomorrow, Mark Sterling would learn that charity cases sometimes have longer and more detailed memories than he had ever expected. Friday morning began with Mark banging on my bedroom door at 7 a.m. "Art, get out here. We need to talk." I found him in the kitchen, pacing like a caged animal. Chloe was there too, still in her silk pajamas, looking deeply uncomfortable. "What's this about a will reading?" Mark demanded, waving his phone in my face. "I just got some formal, legalistic invitation from your lawyer." "Eleanor had a will," I said calmly, pouring myself a cup of coffee. It seemed appropriate to read it. "I was married to her for 7 years. I think I would know if she had a will." "There's a lot you don't know, Mark." He stepped closer, trying to use his height to intimidate me. At 6'2", Mark was used to towering over people. But 40 years in architecture and construction had taught me that a solid foundation can't be intimidated by a flashy facade. "Like what?" he challenged. "Like the difference between assuming you own something and actually owning it." Chloe shifted nervously in her chair. "Maybe I should go," she said. "No," Mark snapped. "You live here now. You have a right to know what's going on. Live here now. The man moved fast when it suited him. "Tell me, Mark," I said, sitting down with my coffee. "Have you ever actually looked at the property deed for this house?" "Of course I have. Eleanor and I bought it in 2017. "Really? Show it to me." "Show you what?" "The deed, the mortgage paperwork, the closing documents. You know, the actual physical proof that you own this place." Mark's face reddened. "I don't have to prove anything to you. You're the one who's been living here for free." "Free," I repeated, letting the word hang in the air. "That's an interesting concept. What do you think I've been paying for the last 7 years?" "What are you talking about?" "The utility bills, Mark. The property taxes, the insurance premiums, the maintenance costs. Do you think those things just magically disappear?" "Eleanor handled all that stuff," he said dismissively. "And Eleanor handled it with whose money?" For the first time, a flicker of uncertainty crossed Mark's face. He was starting to realize that he had never actually seen a bill, never written a check, never questioned where the money came from to keep his comfortable, convenient lifestyle running. "The mortgage payments come out of my account," he said, but his voice was less confident now. "Really? Which bank?" "First National." "And the account number?" "I don't have to—" "Because I happen to know Janet Harrison, a senior vice president over at First National. We go way back. In fact, she's coming to the will reading this afternoon." Chloe was watching this exchange like a tennis match, her head moving back and forth between us. I could see the wheels turning in her mind, probably wondering what, exactly, she had gotten herself into. "You're bluffing," Mark said, but he didn't sound sure. "Am I?" I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out a business card. It was old, faded, but still perfectly legible. Vance Architectural Design Development. Established 1995. Mark squinted at the card. "What's this?" "My business card, Mark. From back when I was developing commercial properties instead of fixing your leaky faucets." "You were a handyman," he said, but his voice was weakening, the statement sounding more like a question. "I was a lot of things," I replied, "some of which you might find surprising." Chloe leaned forward. "Mark, what is he talking about?" "Nothing," Mark said quickly. "He's just trying to confuse things before he has to move out." I finished my coffee and stood up. "Well, we'll find out this afternoon, won't we? Isabella is expecting everyone at 2 o'clock. I'm not going to some dog and pony show just to watch you make a fool of yourself." "That's your choice, Mark." "But I should mention that Isabella will be reviewing several documents today, not just Eleanor's will." "What other documents?" "Property records, tax filings, some business documents from the late 90s. It should be quite educational." Mark's face went pale. "What kind of business documents?" "The kind that explain how a simple handyman could afford to live in a house like this for 7 years without ever paying a dime in rent." I headed toward the door, then stopped. "Oh, and Mark, you might want to bring some identification today. Isabella is going to need to verify your legal standing before she can discuss certain matters with you." "My legal standing?" "Your right to be in this house, your claim to ownership, that sort of thing." Chloe grabbed Mark's arm. "What is he talking about, honey?" "I don't know," Mark said, but he was staring at me with something that was beginning to look a lot like fear. "The old man's lost his mind." "Have I?" I asked. "Or have you just never bothered to ask the right questions?" I walked to the front door, then turned back one last time. 2 o'clock, Mark. Rossi Associates on 17th Street. Don't be late." As I closed the door behind me, I could hear Chloe's voice rising in panic. "Mark, what is going on? What aren't you telling me?" But Mark's response was too muffled to make out, probably because he was finally starting to realize that he didn't actually know what he wasn't telling her. I spent the morning at Isabella's office, reviewing a mountain of documents and preparing for the afternoon's main event. Some of those papers hadn't seen the daylight in 25 years. Today, they were going to change everything. At 1:45, I walked back into the house to get ready. Mark was in the living room, frantically searching through a box of papers, Eleanor's papers, documents he had never bothered to read when she was alive. "Looking for something?" I asked. He looked up, sweat beading on his forehead. "Where's the deed, Art? Where's the actual property deed?" I smiled. "That's a very good question, Mark. I suggest you ask Isabella." The thing about living quietly, about making yourself small for the comfort of others, is that people stop paying attention to the details. They see what they expect to see, and they miss everything else. Take my watch, for instance. Mark had seen me wear it every day for 7 years, a simple classic dive watch. He'd never bothered to notice it was a Rolex Submariner, an $18,000 piece of precision engineering. Not exactly what you'd expect a charity case to own. Or my tools, the ones he had so contemptuously locked away in the shed. Professional-grade equipment, a Hilti hammer drill worth $3,000, Festool sanders worth $1,500 each, laser levels, premium hand tools, specialized measuring equipment. The kind of collection you accumulate when you're not just fixing leaky pipes, but overseeing million-dollar construction projects. But Mark saw an old man in worn work clothes and assumed he knew the whole story. As I walked to Isabella's office, my phone rang. The caller ID said, "Harrison, First National." "Janet, good to hear from you," I said. "Art, I got the invitation to this will reading. I have to ask, is this about the Halicon Legacy Trust account?" "Among other things," I replied. Janet had been my personal banker for 20 years. She had handled the financing for most of my development projects back in the day, including the creative legal and financial arrangements I had made to purchase certain properties without my name appearing on the public records. "How much documentation should I bring?" she asked. "The full portfolio summary should do it. Assets, holdings, transaction history, the works." "Art, that's a lot of paperwork." "Are you sure you want to do this?" "I'm sure, Janet. It's time." After hanging up, I checked my email. There were 3 messages from different property management companies, routine reports about my various commercial holdings around Seattle, rental income, maintenance updates, market evaluations, the kind of correspondence that would have shocked Mark if he had ever bothered to ask why a poor, retired handyman received so much mail from entities like Premier Property Management and Emerald City Real Estate Holdings. I had been careful about that mail for 7 years, having it delivered to a secure P.O. box instead of the house. I couldn't risk Mark accidentally seeing a statement from a company that managed a portfolio of multi-million-dollar properties. The irony was delicious. Mark spent his days in the world of high-stakes tech sales, a world built on evaluating assets and identifying opportunities. He should have recognized the signs of hidden wealth. He should have noticed that his supposedly destitute father-in-law never seemed stressed about money, never worried about bills, never asked for financial help. Instead, he saw an old man who fixed things, and he assumed that was the entire picture. My phone buzzed with a text from Isabella. "Frank Rodriguez just called. Says he has some interesting photographs to share this afternoon." "What have you been up to, Art?" Frank, my next-door neighbor, was a retired police sergeant with a keen eye for detail and an even better memory for facts. He had been watching Mark's behavior all week, documenting things that might soon become relevant. More importantly, Frank remembered the old days, back when I was still actively developing properties, before I had made the conscious decision to step back and live a quieter life. He had been at the ribbon cutting for the Highlands Plaza project in 2008. He had photos of me shaking hands with the mayor, accepting a community development award. Those photos were about to become very relevant. At 1:30, I stopped by the house to change. Mark was still in the living room, frantically sifting through boxes of papers. Chloe was pacing in the driveway, talking rapidly on her phone. "Mom, I don't know what's happening," she was saying. "Mark won't tell me anything, but something is really, really wrong. Smart girl. Too bad she'd hitched her wagon to the wrong horse." Inside, I changed into my good suit, a charcoal gray Xenia I'd worn to real estate association dinners, back when I was still networking with developers and city planners. It still fit perfectly. It still looked expensive, because it was. Mark looked up when I came downstairs. For the first time since I had known him, he was completely speechless. The transformation from a quiet old man in work clothes to a man dressed for a corporate boardroom had apparently registered, even with him. "Where did you get that suit?" he asked quietly. "Same place I got the watch," I replied. "Same place I got the tools you locked away. Same place I got a lot of things you've never bothered to ask about." Chloe had come inside, her face pale with panic. She stared at me for a long moment, then turned to Mark. "Why does he look like he's going to a business meeting instead of a will reading?" Mark didn't answer. He couldn't answer, because he was finally starting to understand that maybe, just maybe, he had been making some very dangerous, very costly assumptions about the old man he had been so cavalierly pushing around. I checked my Rolex 1:45. "Time to go," I said. "Isabella doesn't like to be kept waiting." As we walked to our separate cars, I noticed that Mark's hands were shaking. Good. He was finally asking the right questions. Too bad for him. He was about 7 years too late. Isabella Rossi's conference room had a wall of floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking downtown Seattle and a polished mahogany table that could seat 12. Today, it was going to seat 8 very uncomfortable people. I arrived first, as planned. Isabella was already there, 3 thick accordion files spread across the table like a legal arsenal. "How are you feeling, Art?" she asked. "Like Christmas morning," I said, and I meant it. Frank Rodriguez, my neighbor, arrived next, carrying a manila folder thick with photographs. Behind him came Janet Harrison from the bank, professional as always in her navy suit, a heavy briefcase in her hand. Then came the main event. Mark walked in with Chloe clinging to his arm, both of them looking like they were attending their own execution. They were followed by 3 of our neighbors, Mrs. Chen from across the street, the Morrison couple from next door, and young Jake Peterson, who lived 2 houses down, all people who had witnessed this week's drama unfold with growing alarm. The last to arrive was someone Mark didn't expect, City Councilman Richard Barnes. He had worked with me on several development projects over the years and had readily agreed to attend as a character witness. "Art," he said, shaking my hand warmly, "good to see you again, though I am so sorry for the circumstances." Mark's mouth fell open. "You two, you know each other?" Richard laughed. "Know each other? Art developed half the commercial properties in my district. We've been working together for 20 years. Chloe grabbed Mark's arm tighter. "Mark, what is going on?" Isabella called the meeting to order. "We are here today to read the last will and testament of Eleanor Vance Sterling, deceased March 8, 2024. She opened the first folder and began to read. Eleanor's will was straightforward. A few personal items to friends, her car to a local animal shelter, and a touching, heartfelt letter to me about how much our relationship had meant to her. Then Isabella opened the second folder. However, before we can fully execute Eleanor's wishes, we need to address some questions regarding property ownership that have recently come to light. Mark leaned forward. What kind of questions? Questions about who actually owns the house where you've been living, Mr. Sterling, Isabella replied, her voice cool and precise. I own that house, Mark said, but his voice cracked on the last word. Eleanor and I bought it in 2017. Isabella pulled out a thick, official-looking document. This is the warranty deed for 1247 Maple Grove Drive, recorded with King County on March 15, 1998. She passed it around the table. Mark grabbed it first, his eyes scanning the page frantically. The property was purchased by the Halicon Legacy Trust, Isabella continued, for $180,000. The purchaser's representative and sole trustee was Arthur James Vance. The room went dead silent. You could hear the air conditioning humming. That's impossible, Mark stammered, staring at the document as if it were written in a foreign language. Is it? Isabella pulled out another stack of papers. These are the property tax records for the same address. 25 years of payments, all made by the Halicon Legacy Trust. The total amount paid in property taxes over that period is over $900,000. Janet Harrison opened her briefcase. And I have the banking records, she said quietly. All payments for taxes, insurance, and utilities originated from Mr. Vance's business account. Mark's face was now the color of ash. But Eleanor said we bought the house. You moved into the house, I corrected him calmly. Eleanor never said you bought it. You just heard what you wanted to hear. Chloe stood up abruptly. I need some air. Sit down, Isabella said firmly. We're not finished. She opened the third folder, the thick one. Mr. Sterling, you have been living in Mr. Vance's property for the past 7 years. During that time, did you ever pay rent? No, but did you ever pay the property taxes? Eleanor handled. Did you ever pay the homeowner's insurance? I thought, did you ever see a single mortgage statement with your name on it? Mark's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. No sound came out. Frank Rodriguez cleared his throat. If I may, he said, opening his own folder, I have some photographs that might be relevant to the question of Mr. Vance's financial standing. He spread a series of 8x10 photos across the table. There I was, at various ribbon cuttings, award ceremonies, and business dinners. One showed me shaking hands with the mayor at the dedication of the Highlands Plaza. Another showed me receiving the Washington State Real Estate Developer of the Year Award in 2008. I took most of these myself, Frank said, back when Art was one of the most successful and respected property developers in King County. Councilman Barnes nodded. Mr. Vance's developments have brought in over $40 million in tax revenue to our city. We've honored him multiple times for his contributions to community growth and his philanthropic work. Mark was staring at the photos as if they depicted a man from another planet. You're a handyman, he whispered. I'm a retired architectural designer and real estate developer, I corrected him. I did handyman work as a hobby. It kept my skills sharp, kept me connected to the trades. But you're poor, Chloe protested, her voice a high-pitched squeak. You dress like you drive that old truck. Janet Harrison laughed, a sharp, clear sound that cut through the tension. Mr. Vance's personal net worth is approximately $15.2 million. His property portfolio includes 12 commercial buildings and 6 residential rental properties throughout the Seattle metropolitan area. The neighbors were murmuring now, the pieces of the puzzle clicking into place. Mrs. Chen was nodding, a knowing, vindicated look on her face. Isabella pulled out one final document. This brings us to the current situation. Mr. Sterling, you served Mr. Vance with a 30-day notice to vacate his own property. Is that correct? I didn't know. You also changed the locks on his personal storage area, preventing him from accessing tools and equipment worth approximately $50,000. Is that correct? Mark's hands were now shaking visibly. I thought, and you disposed of his late daughter's personal belongings without his permission, including items of significant sentimental and financial value. Is that correct? Stop, Chloe said suddenly, her voice cracking. Just stop. Mark, we're leaving, now. Actually, you can't leave, Mr. Sterling, Isabella said, her voice like ice. We have one more document to review. She pulled out a crisp, official-looking paper. This is a 30-day notice to quit and surrender possession of the premises, served by the legal owner and trustee of 1247 Maple Grove Drive. She slid it across the table to Mark. Congratulations, Mr. Sterling. You're being evicted. The room erupted. Chloe was hyperventilating into a paper bag. Mark was staring at the eviction notice as if it might burst into flames. The neighbors were whispering excitedly, and I could hear Mrs. Chen saying, I knew something was off about that boy. But I just sat there, perfectly calm, watching 25 years of careful, quiet planning finally come to light. Isabella banged a small gavel on the table. Yes, she actually had a gavel, and called for order. We are not finished here. Mr. Sterling, do you understand the document you have just been served? Mark looked up, his face completely drained of color. This can't be legal. I live there. I have rights. You have squatter's rights, Isabella replied coldly, which in the state of Washington require you to openly and hostilely occupy a property for 10 years while paying all taxes and fees. You have done neither. Janet Harrison opened another folder. I have the complete financial history of this arrangement. Mr. Vance has paid every single expense associated with 1247 Maple Grove Drive since 1998. Property taxes, insurance, utilities, maintenance, capital improvements, everything. She spread a series of bank statements across the table, a paper trail of my quiet, consistent support. The total investment in this property, beyond the original purchase price, comes to approximately $1.4 million. But I improved the house, Mark protested weakly. I put in that new deck. With materials purchased by Mr. Vance, Frank Rodriguez interjected. I helped him load that lumber, $1,400 worth from Home Depot. Art paid cash. The hot water heater, Mark tried again. Installed by Morrison Sons Plumbing, I said calmly. The check came from my account. I have the receipt. The new windows, Isabella interrupted, consulting her notes. Anderson Glass Company. $8,000, paid by the Hallicon Legacy Trust on September 15, 2019. Chloe was rocking back and forth in her chair. This isn't happening. This isn't happening. Oh, it's happening, Councilman Barnes said, a grim look on his face. Art, why didn't you ever tell anyone about this arrangement? Eleanor asked me not to, I said simply. She was embarrassed that Mark couldn't afford the lifestyle he felt he deserved. She thought it would hurt his pride if people knew I was subsidizing their life. The truth hit Mark like a physical blow. Eleanor, She knew? Eleanor helped set up the whole arrangement, I said. She came to me in 2017 in tears because you had applied for a mortgage you couldn't possibly afford, and you were about to be rejected. The house was about to go into foreclosure from the previous owners. She begged me to buy it through the trust and let you live there. That's impossible. Isabella pulled out another document. This is a letter from Eleanor, written in 2017 and placed in our files for safekeeping. Would you like me to read it? Yes, I said firmly. Read it. Isabella's voice softened as she began. Dad, I know this arrangement is going to be hard on you, but I need you to know how grateful I am. Mark has such pride about being the provider, and if he knew the truth about our finances, it would destroy him. He works so hard, but his salary just isn't enough for the life we want together. I promise that someday I will find a way to pay you back for everything you've done. I love you so much for making this possible. Please, please don't ever let Mark know. It would kill him to realize he's been living on charity. Love always, Eleanor. The silence that followed was deafening. Mark was crying now, silent tears streaming down his face as the full scope of his own arrogance and his wife's profound protective love became clear. She protected you for 7 years, I said quietly. Well, she made sure you never had to face the reality of your own finances. She made sure you could keep your fragile pride intact. And how did you repay that kindness? Isabella asked, her voice as sharp as a blade. By kicking her father out of his own house before her body was even cold in the ground. Chloe suddenly stood up, her face a mask of horror. I can't do this. Mark, I'm sorry, but I can't do this. She grabbed her purse. Call me when you figure out where you're going to live. She walked out without a single backward glance. Through the window, we could all see her getting into her car and speeding away. Mark watched her go, then turned back to the table, his shoulders slumped in defeat. What happens now? Now, you have 30 days to find somewhere else to live, Isabella said. The same courtesy you so generously extended to Mr. Vance. All personal belongings must be removed. Any items left behind will be considered abandoned property. But my stuff is there. My furniture. The furniture Eleanor picked out using my credit card, I said. Check the receipts. Everything in that house was purchased with my money, through shell companies I set up to protect Eleanor's feelings. Janet Harrison consulted her records. Furniture and appliances, $43,000. Electronics, $12,000. Art and decorations, $8,000. All paid for by various Vance business entities. I don't have anywhere to go, Mark said desperately. That's not really my problem anymore, is it? I replied, using his exact words from 2 days ago. Most people would call 7 years of free housing pretty generous. Isabella gathered her papers. Mr. Sterling, you will receive formal documentation within 48 hours. As people filed out, shaking my hand and offering quiet words of congratulations and support, Mark remained seated, staring at the eviction notice. 7 years, he whispered. I lived there for 7 years. Yes, I said, putting on my coat. 7 years of kindness you mistook for weakness. 7 years of generosity you mistook for desperation. I paused at the door, turning back to look at him one last time. The tragedy isn't that you're losing the house, Mark. The tragedy is that you never appreciated having it in the first place. The ride back to the house was the longest 5 minutes of my life. For the first time in a week, I was going home to my home, with the legal authority to determine who could and couldn't stay there. When I pulled into the driveway, I found Mark's belongings scattered everywhere. Chloe had clearly started packing in a panic before she fled. My phone rang. It was Isabella. "Art, he's going to fight this. He'll probably try to claim some kind of implied ownership." "Let him try," I said. "I'm filing a restraining order tomorrow morning and a motion for immediate possession based on his threats and illegal exclusion." When I walked inside, I found Mark sitting on the floor amidst the chaos, a bottle of whiskey in his hand. "I called my mom," he said, his voice slurring. "She said she'd been wondering for years how I could afford this place on my salary." He laughed, a bitter, broken sound. "Turns out there were a lot of things Eleanor never knew, too. I had some gambling debts a few years back." As he spoke, a police cruiser pulled into the driveway. Mark had called them, a last desperate act of a man who still couldn't comprehend his own defeat. The officers were polite but firm. After reviewing the eviction notice, they informed Mark that this was a civil matter and suggested he find somewhere else to stay while he consulted an attorney. As they left, he turned to me, his arrogance completely gone, replaced by a raw, pleading fear. "Art, I know I don't have the right to ask this, but could I have until Monday, just to figure out where I'm going?" I studied his face. The bully was gone. In his place was a broken, pathetic man. "You can stay until Monday morning," I said, "but you sleep in the guest room, and you don't touch anything else in this house. This is my home, and you will treat it with respect." He nodded, looking grateful for even that small mercy. I walked upstairs to Eleanor's room, where I could finally grieve in peace, knowing that no one would be rushing me or telling me to pack up my memories. By Sunday afternoon, the entire neighborhood knew. I was working in the garden when Mrs. Chen from across the street came over with a casserole. "Art," she said, "we're having a little gathering tonight at 6, a welcome back party for the real homeowner." By 6 o'clock, my backyard was full of friends and neighbors. For the first time in years, my house felt like a home instead of a tense battleground. Monday morning, I watched from the window as Mark loaded the last of his belongings into a rental truck. Before he left, he walked up to the porch and handed me a small box. Inside was Eleanor's promise ring, the one I'd given her for her 16th birthday. "She asked me to make sure you got this back," he said quietly. "She said it was more important to her than her wedding ring." For the first time since this ordeal began, I felt tears in my eyes. "For what it's worth, Art," he said as he turned to leave, "you raised an amazing daughter. She loved you more than anything." Then he drove away, and I was finally alone in my house, but I wasn't really alone. I had a neighborhood full of friends, a successful business waiting for my attention, and 40 years of memories in a home that had always been mine. Most importantly, I had the knowledge that I had honored my daughter's dying wish to protect her husband's pride while still, in the end, protecting my own dignity. 3 months later, I was sitting in my newly renovated home office, Eleanor's old bedroom, which I had finally felt ready to transform, when the doorbell rang. It was Mark. He looked different, thinner, more tired, but somehow more substantial. "I'm living in Portland now," he said, standing on the porch. "Got a job with a smaller company. Less money, but more honest work. I started seeing a therapist, talking about why I needed to feel so important all the time. He told me he had finally understood that he had been so afraid of being seen as a failure that he had convinced himself he was entitled to a success that was never actually his. A car pulled into my driveway. It was Isabella, arriving for our weekly business meeting. I had come out of retirement, and we were now developing a new affordable housing project downtown. "Art," Mark said, as he turned to leave, "I know I don't have the right to ask this, but would it be okay if I sent you a card on Eleanor's birthday, just to let you know I'm thinking about her?" I studied his face. The desperation was gone, replaced by something that looked like genuine remorse. "That would be fine," I said. "But Mark, don't expect me to send one back. Forgiveness is a process, not a single event." He nodded. "I understand. And Art, thank you for giving me a place to start that process." After he left, Isabella and I went inside to review the architectural plans. "How do you feel about that?" she asked. "Better than I expected," I admitted. "He seems like he's actually learning from this. Do you think you'll ever have a real relationship with him again?" "I don't know," I said. "Maybe, but it would have to be a very different kind of relationship, based on honesty instead of convenience, respect instead of assumption, boundaries instead of exploitation." Isabella smiled. "Sounds like good principles for all relationships." She was right. I had spent the last 3 months applying those same principles to every aspect of my own life. I had reconnected with old friends, gotten involved in city planning committees, and even started dating a wonderful woman who knew exactly who I was and what I was worth. I had established a scholarship fund in Eleanor's name. I had found ways to keep her spirit alive while still living my own life. The house felt lighter now, filled with friends and laughter. Life wasn't just moving forward. It was moving forward with purpose, dignity, and honest relationships. And for the first time in a very long time, that felt like more than enough. If you are dealing with someone in your life who takes your generosity for granted, remember this: kindness should never require you to sacrifice your self-respect. Setting boundaries isn't cruel. It's a necessary act of self-preservation. Thank you for watching. Let me know in the comments how you have handled situations like this in your own life.